All right, guys. So welcome to Sunday Study, April 25th. Pretty volatile week as far as just range goes. It was a pretty cool week with a couple of liquidation type events, and at the end of the day, price sort of ended up right where it started, and all for naught, if you will. Hate to say that, but for all the action and volatility that happened in the market this week. A lot of great opportunities to play the edges, but were what contained the market. Obviously, anything below 41.10 was pretty well capped, and just that slight peak above all-time high late in the day on Friday to give that one-time framing on a weekly perspective. So, kind of an interesting week and an interesting setup for this week, with starting to see a little bit more balance from the market as compared to the just open drive after open drive after open drive. But yeah, I think that was kind of the impotence for what we wanted to cover this week as far as just general topics. Like I said in sort of the pregame here, also went through the chat and tried to find a couple of things that folks had asked that we cover. So I think, Job, I know you jumped on and you're out there in nature, walking in the hills, and
Yes, sir.
you're ready to share what you've got kind of lined up for the week, and maybe just a little bit about what you saw last week as well. So I'll pass it to you, sir, and look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Oh, you want me to go right now?
Yeah, fire away.
All right. So my weekly pivot is 41.52. So we have some prominent LVNs in that range. One around, if you look at the weekly or monthly profile, I believe it's around 41.32. And so if you are watching the price action dive down into that, we're actually diving into fair value. And so when price gets into fair value, that's when you get that two-way trade. The two-way trade is where people get destroyed. And so as my buddy David, VIX guy, likes to talk, trade the tips.
Hmm.
So allow this to get into that range and watch for that bid on your tape. Bid on the tape. Everybody talks about this on Twitter. How do you see it? So pull up a tape, filter your results to see who is actually transacting at market, and see when the bids come in and buy at market. That's the cleanest way to do it. So if you buy in, if you're going long and you don't have other people buying at market on the tape, then you're in trouble. I mean, that's my personal opinion. And it seems to work out, especially for my own trading and those I trade with. But it's something you want to kind of stick to. So 41.52 is my weekly pivot. Above that, somebody in our group who is a very well respected trader also mentioned that we have a bullish imbalance. An imbalance is simply the distance you trade away from POC. And so if we trade away from POC to a certain degree and we have a fade or a faded volume, then we should clean that POC to the opposite side. And so that brings us to 4,200.
Hey, Joe, real
So my
quick,
chart,
that
yep.
imbalance, is that on a weekly or a monthly? As I'll try to pull that up for the group. Do you
So
know off the top of your head?
look at a weekly.
Weekly? Okay, I'm on it. Sorry, carry on.
No, you're good. And so like look at that, and so with that being said, target one to the upside truly is 42.13. We're gonna catch some resistance around the mid 70s. That's where they have defended on the sell side all week. If I sound a little winded, it's only because I'm like humping this walk here. You know,
True
I like
trader,
to get a little work.
dedicated to
Yeah,
teaching out here.
I like to get a little work out of it. And so, my little one, she even said to me, She's like, 4152 is important. Yeah. So we get down there. Um, Pay attention to it. Don't view it as a line in the sand. View it as a range. So if we get down to 4152 and we dive down into the low 40s and we taper the volume,
All in long.
that's
I'll push all the chips in.
exactly like Leo just said. So if we taper volume, volume is going to show you the interest. And I'm getting excited here. I got goosebumps in my arms. Um, so that volume is the interest. If you walk into a store and people are bidding up or buying up a device or whatever, um, it's going to get to the point where they stop even trying to buy it. But as we go down, same bit and selling it. If you want to sell something, so as this goes down, it's going to be getting to an unfair range. When that unfair range develops, we're going to see that in a taper of volume, no further interest. In that taper, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get the one tick MAE. Like, stop doing that. Like all the Twitter gurus who boast this all the time, that's absolute BS. You're not going to do this every single trade. Allow that to taper, allow that to bid. Okay, it's going to aggressively bid out, slam all the short seller stops. It's going to aggressively like drive up, and then it's going to retrace and come back. It's going to come back to where those stops got hit, and those buyers will be sitting there to get it. That's where I'll be.
On
So
the
I really don't
tips.
care. Yeah, I don't care about being perfect. I care about being proper with my risk management. So let the structure develop and also manage your risk. So when we get down to the 50s range, if this aggressively dives down to the 20s and comes back up to the 50s and gets hit by sellers again, you know the sell's on. Okay? But if this comes down under the 50s, tapers, and the sellers get really aggressive and they don't get very far, and the volume tapers, and it drives up and it stops them out. You can see that on your delta. And it comes back down. That's your buy point. That's your buy point. You can get in and get in, take your profit a little bit beyond that, and then let a runner go because you don't know how far the buyers are willing to take it from there.
And we've got some extended targets out there too. I mean, blue skies
Exactly.
and the opportunity is definitely infinite to the upside.
Yeah, yeah.
Joe,
The
if you don't
downside's
mind,
limited.
I want to probe a little bit into a comment you made, and one of the one of the calls. I don't know if I'd call is the right word, but just like kind of one of the disclaimers that you threw out last week, and that was waiting for the market to develop and the structure to develop for the day. And I could be wrong, but I think it was Wednesday. It might have been Tuesday. Um, and there was some choppy action in the morning. And I just remember your comment saying, guys, let's be patient. There's no need to jump in right here. Let's let the structure of the market develop. And I want to say you let the market come down 15 or 20 points before it based, and then you struck down in like, God, was it the 130s or the 114s? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so basically, like with anybody that I'm trading with, um, or who knows me with my style of trading, I'm also very patient. There's a lot of gunslingers that I work with. They'll take literally anything, boom, 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 and they do very well. But one thing I like to do before I put a full core on is let that thing develop. And so if the price is if the market's going to go down, it's going to go down to a point where it runs out of sellers. The market only goes down because of sellers present. When there's no longer sellers present, it stops going down. And so if you think about your retail guy, you have your SMAs and you're following the lower lows, lower highs. and they're putting their stops along the way with those. And so when you see this going down, 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 and it just doesn't stop, it's relentless. Wait if you want to get long. If you're already short, great, just follow. But if you want to get long, just wait and allow that thing to go until it blows through those stops. And at that point, a lot of retail's thinking, man, I missed the entry. And that's false. That's actually the opposite. The proper entry is allowing this to jack way up, run through those stops, come back to that area of interest where it initially blew through those stops, where that acceleration occurred, and that's where you want to pounce. And so it's very clear if you just give the opportunity to watch it. You're going to get a taper on the volume profile. Another thing that points out is when price is going down or going up, you're getting an offsides delta. Offsides delta, what is that? Well, if I have 1,000 people willing to buy and one person willing to sell, I'm going to have 999 buy delta, right? And conversely, if price is going down and I got 3,000 people willing to sell and only five people willing to buy, then I'm going to get 2,995 offside delta negative. That's crowded. We don't want to be with the crowd. We want to make sure that we're trading with what is perceived as value. And so you see these things offset, it's going to taper in volume. Boom, you act on that, you take it against, and if you miss that lower entry, don't fret yourself about that. Allow it to push up, come back, and in that area where you see that acceleration, how do you see the acceleration? Well, you might be looking at a 5-minute candle, a 5,000 tick candle, whatever. You're going to see a large candle, boom, it bursts. Let it come back to that range. That's where those stops were, because the first buyers on any type of rally are not buyers. They're shorts getting stopped out.
That's good. Hmm. Yeah, I see that a lot too with the delta ranges where I call it the peak and retest. It's like they overrun the zone, and that's probably that impulse of, that rush to cover. And then they kind of pull it back in. And when you see that pull back in and then you see the initiation, that tends to be the sweet spot for me. I call it like the PO, like they set the POC on a lower time frame, and I'll show this on the trigger chart here in a little bit. But they set that POC on a lower time frame of that initiative move down, that impulsive move down. That's sort of, to your point, those stops being hit, and that it seems like for me, I get that best price when I wait for that confirmation, come back, test that zone, test that offsides deltas, really kind of like see, okay, is there more interest to sell down here? And if not, then yep, this was covering. All right, let's go. And that tends to be for me an area where I can get really, really good risk versus reward ratio.
Right. So how do you find an executionable means of getting into that trade? Well, it comes down. Let's say we had that V-shaped recovery. It popped up, and then it starts to pull back. Then you pull up your time and sales, and on that time and sales, you'll see that blast of buying at market. That's when you know that level's in. At which point, I want to put no more than a 4-point risk on that. Because at this point, I hope everybody's traded through a down market, but at least you can manage that risk. So it comes down to that rebid point. And then you look at your time and sales, you see that blast of at market buys, you dive into that, and you let that ride and let your stop decide.
Love it. Job, good stuff, man. I appreciate you jumping in and sharing with the group. I know you're enjoying the wilderness. I know you said you had some time with the family tonight set aside. So, as always, man, thank you. The insight is always appreciated and always
Yeah,
welcome.
glad to be here.
For sure, brother. All right, well, guys, I will jump into the next section, which is really just going to be a continuation of what Job was speaking about. And I, before I jump into what I'm seeing from a weekly perspective, is kind of go back and talk about what we talked about last week. And so I'm gonna paste a screenshot that's just kind of my weekly levels post from last week in the chat. And just and what I do or what I have here is our screen kind of pulled up, or my screen share pulled up for what the week looked like when we were having this call last week. And as you can see, the weekly delta pivot, I know I mentioned it with Job here earlier. The weekly delta pivot was 157 last week, 41.57. This week it's 41.56. It has moved 1 point. And it looks like our upside target one was 41.84, so we got that, and our upside target two was 42.02. Downside target one was 41.30. Downside target two was 41.12. So these levels played beautifully last week. And our setup based upon that was to look to get long, or look for an opportunity to get long below 41.30, targeting 41.84 and 42.02. So if you were able to take that trade, I put a couple of the rules that I look for: hard close on the 30-minute candle below 40.30. I said that I was going to be risking 41.12 and was going to take this on smaller size, since the risk per point was a little bit wider. So obviously that's a pretty wide stop, but given the risk parameters of a 3-to-1, as long as you were smart with your total R that you put onto the trade, this trade played out as just about a 3-to-1 trade, and you actually got it twice throughout the week. So thought that was pretty cool. But the main point I wanted to come back to was we talked a lot about these opening drive ranges and what I call island day value. And we said that these were going to be very big in the upcoming week because there was so many of them. And I think that as we start to find balance, what I'm seeing in the markets is that we are sort of out of areas for price to be advertised in this zone. Then that's not to say that we can't continue to chop this balance and do a 15, 20-day balance, and we could be stuck here till May. But with that being said, you look back and you look at these areas in these zones that have been played. I think we have some potential to start to look at prices to be advertised either above or below this range that we've been in for a few days. So what I have pulled up is what we saw Sunday last week, and we mentioned opening drive ranges were going to be pretty big. This particular open drive range, I'll hide that there. This was not in play because that came in Monday. But if you look at just these general prices and you think about where we went throughout the week, 41.41 half, huge price. 41.16 quarter, huge price. We never got down to this untested open drive range 15. But as we look at the week, and even the way that we opened, we talked about the opportunity for, if price got down below this 41.48, we knew there was a huge LVN at 41.50, that we could potentially test this opening drive range down to the low side, and we could easily target from 41.41 down into this 41.16 area. And we thought that aggressive sellers would take the opportunity to seize that 41.10 zone, or that low, poor low at 41.10. As I'll just kind of I'll bring that open drive range that ended up printing. As we just kind of talk through the week and look at this as it prints, you can see we came right down into the tick, tested on that first bounce, and then we're able to break through the very next day. And we'll stop here. I mentioned this in the chat in my daily plans, but an open below one of these open drive ranges, as overnight sessions develop and you see the open below one of these ranges, that is a huge indicator that sellers have the potential to push this market lower. And like the market likes to move from balance to imbalance and back to balance, Think of these ranges as that, as like sort of an easy key guide to where those balances might be. Now you can zoom in and find those balances on a lower level, but again, from a high level perspective, I think these were going to play a huge role last week, and I think they actually will this week as well. So some pretty cool balances there. As this continues to develop, we'll obviously put in another opening drive range, but here was this beautiful retest of this 166 level, and this one was just about as good as it gets. So I have this marked as an open drive range level, and the high side as we were coming from below was 41.71 half. Ox was talking about a reoffer zone from some of the swing trades he takes. Leo and Job were talking about this level being a reoffer zone from some of the things that they're looking at. I was looking at 41.71, obviously from this, as well as a reoffer zone. This was a slam dunk. And of course, what happens? The market and the matrix comes together. They drop news. Millionaires are getting taxed, and we go, as Ox would say, to Bora Bora, straight down from 71 all the way down to the open drive range that we had here marked, 41.16, and just a slight peak below, but sellers unable to push below this 41.10. And I actually missed this. This is in my journal, guys, because I held my swing trade way too long. The fact that buyers were able to defend this level, and more so the fact that sellers were unable to complete this move down from those highs and break that poor low and the 4100 psych level, was a major, major sign that we could get long here and risk comfortably below that 4110 area and see what happens. And I wish I would have taken my own advice there. In hindsight, this looks pretty obvious. And again, this is why I'm journaling this. But as we continue to watch this week develop, you see just that beautiful opportunity to come up and in and retest that area. And where do we close? Right back at this 41.66 opening drive range, and we create a new opening drive range. And so as this level has been breached a few times, as far as my notes go, I am going to remove that. I'm also going to look at potentially taking this level out depending on how the action continues to unfold. But for now, I'm watching these opening drive ranges, and specifically this one that was generated on Friday to be a very key area for the market to kind of move and navigate around. And as we zoom out, I don't do this too often, but as we zoom way out, here is what we're looking at below, and I even have some hidden below here. But you see this just stair step of opening drive ranges where we can potentially go from level to level to level. Now, I'm not saying we're going to 44,000 this week, but these are levels that I'm going to continue to watch, and I think that they're going to play a huge factor. The other thing that we talked about was opening drive. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, all right, so the other thing that we talked about was island day value. We said that at the time, island day value was going to be a huge factor. So if I look at this as well, and we go to Monday at 8:30 in the morning, and we just kind of see where were we in the market, as you can see, we had a series of island days here. A little bit of overlapping value here. And again, to recap, what I consider as an island day, and these are just key little nuanced notes that I've seen from just watching the way that the market balances. An island day is a day that does not have TPO value area overlapping anywhere to the right, which to me signifies that price has not been advertised anytime it moves past that to the right in that area again. And so the market constantly looking for an area of transaction where it can go back and forth and back and forth. Well, it hasn't done that here. It hasn't done that here, and it hadn't done that here. We specifically talked about this day, and this is a patented island day, right in between a 3-day value, a 2-day value, island day, and then a 2-day value. This lone day here, all by itself, out on an island by itself, had no price action sitting there by itself. And we had the gap up or break out of balance, and then that break to all-time highs. And then when we open on that Monday and we have this liquidation event as we start to search for lower prices, where does price find a low? Price finds a low under a point away from value area low to this island day. And so again, these nuance things about balance, I continue to journal. I think this was a cool little catch here where anything below here starts to advertise prices as low as down to those 40s and that gap that's just looming down here. So this defend by the buyers was huge, and that's why I think that level continues to be huge. And going back to my other notes about missing how bullish this defense was a little bit of a miss on my behalf and something that I put in the journals for my own growth. But I thought this was cool. And again, as you look at how the week now plays out, we have this white box is what I'm considering like a larger balance, and then we created a multi-day balance after that. And so if you look at the way this developed, you had a balance or an island day here and an island day here. Well, this day covered this island day. And where did it kind of overlap? Right in here, and you can see this just beautiful confluence between these two island days and defense of this balance. And then when we drop out of that, of course, we just talked about this very nice value area low catch here at that 4110. And then we start to do this like back and forth news driven, kind of from lows to highs of the range that has a 3-day overlapping value and eliminating any of the island days that were left out in this area. And so now all we really have left as you zoom out from an island day perspective, which I think is key, is Friday. So watching the way that value develops will be extremely important coming into the day on Monday. If we open above this value or can get above this value area high of 4186 roughly, I'm just going to round it, I think that's an extremely bullish sign. And if especially to Job's point, what that team watches for is we can do that with volume confirmation, that's going to be even more bullish. Now on the flip side, you see all of these just micro balances below and nowhere that has not had price advertised. So if aggressive sellers want to try to advertise prices in a new area, the very last place to do that is going to be, or the very next place to do that is going to be all the way down here at 40.04. And so if you are looking for a volatile move and if sellers are really looking to push, the only unadvertised prices that we have down in this last, call it 2 weeks, is all the way down on this gap. And so the big move for me for the sellers this week is down into this 40.40 level and to push or attempt to push this gap. I obviously 40.10 or 41.10 is sitting in that way, but I believe below 41.10, aggressive sellers should try to push these levels and start to expose some of this weaker structure down below. The same thing on the upside. Obviously, this break of this multi-day balance with volume, and then looking for some balance maybe up in the 42.50s would be the high side target that I would be looking for. So that's kind of what I'm looking for to play. Again, leaning on these open drive ranges from a 15-minute perspective and watching these island days as they develop, as we are sort of out of them on the high side and only seeing them on the low side. And so I'll stop right there, see if there's any questions for that. And while we do that, guys, I had a lot of questions about the 1250 trigger chart that RPMs and bar by bar shared. I'm going to pull up a few examples, but I thought it would be kind of fun if rather than just kind of cherry pick a beautiful example, if somebody who's in the chat would mind just kind of throwing up any day next week and or I'm sorry, last week. And what we'll do is I'll go pull my daily levels from that. We'll find a couple of the daily levels that I called out, and we'll go do a replay of those prices. So if anybody from chat just wants to throw a random day from last week in there, I will go up and we'll pull that up.
Tuesday.
Tuesday. All right. Leo's calling Tuesday. So let's go to Kingdom Traders, and we'll go to Tuesday. What was Tuesday? Is Tuesday 420? Yeah, 420. All right, so Tuesday. Hey, yo. All right, so Tuesday 420, buyers targets 41. Let's see, what was Tuesday 420. So we got buyers targets 41.42, 41.54, sellers targets 41.31, 41.13. And what we were looking for from that was 41.13 was the poor week low. Okay, so we were watching that. This level was starred in the chat. Uh, and obviously we had 41.14, which was weekly IB, and then we had some other kind of confluence areas. So let's just go check out that zone. And so I will minimize this here and we'll pull this in. I'm going to go directly to this trigger chart. So if you guys haven't seen this or haven't kind of heard RPM, bar by bar, whoever talk about this, this is one of the main charts that I'm using from an entry level or from an entry perspective to give me that confirmation on areas that I'm already watching, whether that's a market generated like mechanical level, such as a poor low or previous day value or a high, VWAP, whatever it might be, or a rebid reoffer zone, anything that I'm looking for, a zone that I want to watch price action in, it's going to come down to this. So right now it's set to 625 because we're in overnight session. I'll go down back to 1250, which is what I use for regular session. And I like a 3-tick interval. So that's going to compress it to about 3 ticks. And what we'll do is we will go back to that date of 420 and we will start it. We'll just go to the afternoon here. And we'll take a look at that. And what we'll do is we'll zoom back to that as price comes into that 41.13 level, because I do believe that we will pull into that 40.13 level throughout this day. And so we'll just zoom out a little bit. And as you can see, this was the day where we had, I believe, the open drive down. This was also, I think, the day that I was referring to where I was really impressed by Job's call on patience in the morning. I think uh, there was a tendency to want to try to catch this move versus waiting and let the market digest it and see what happens. So as we watch this level come in, we were watching, say, a zone, call it from like 41.16, I would say down to 41.10. And so as I'm looking at this trigger chart, you can see price make its first entry. We'll say 41.16 just for the sake of that. You can see price make its first kind of aggressive move down into this 41.16 area right here. And what I'm looking for at this juncture is I am looking for aggressive selling to be that initiative impulse into a level. And what that means to me is that sellers are exhausting into this level on the downside, or buyers are exhausting into this level on the upside. And so if you hear us talk about orange towers in, blue towers out, that's going to be aggressive selling in and aggressive buying out. And that aggressive selling is exhaustion, and the buying is initiation out of a level. And so not only do I want to just look for an orange tower, and I have these color coded so that the darker the orange, the higher the volume, but I also am looking for a delta percentage. And I know RPM says he doesn't look at delta percentage. It's just a pattern that I've learned to recognize. So if I see the all orange bars, I'm going to look directly down and I'm looking to see, were these bars done on like sort of a churn volume where there's a little bit of back and forth, but it just so happened that sellers, were a little bit more aggressive and so they got that orange bar print? Or was this like a nice 40, 50, 60% delta that pushed into the levels, which would obviously be that A plus version? I would say I start being interested somewhere around like 30, maybe 26, depending on the volume of the day, 25 to 30. And that's when I'm going to start to look for this pattern to develop. But for the pattern itself, I think, and I don't have it on this chart at this moment, but what I would look to do is have an area like this already mapped out. And so if I were to come in here and say, all right, this is a supply and resistance zone, and I want to watch, let's just say I want to watch like 41.10 to 41.16, and I'm interested in this zone. Well, I want to see those orange towers in and blue towers out. And if I don't see that initiation in, that kind of tells me that maybe the sellers have a little bit more in the tank. And especially if I don't see that initiative move out, it might say, okay, buyers, had an opportunity, but they didn't really capitalize. And I want to wait for the market to digest this a little bit. So as you can kind of see from a replay perspective here, you've got 10.22. We get a little bit of an initiative move in. You got 28, 26%, but a nice kind of back-to-back orange towers. but you really don't get that like bam finish push in. Now, buyers look like they take advantage of that opportunity and they push out. But again, if you look at the sort of delta by percentage here, 13, 20, and 18%, although the pattern is beautiful as far as orange towers in, blue towers out, the actual numbers and the data that's happening is not telling me that we're seeing the end of this move yet. Now, that could be wrong. This could just be one of those like weaker lows, but that's not the area that I want to lean into with a ton of risk, especially at the high side of this zone. I would rather wait for a weak bounce or a weak bottom to come up and bounce and then show initiation before I go. And if I miss it, I miss it. At least I didn't put my risk or deploy my risk in a C type level. So again, and I don't know what we're going to see here as we continue to scroll to the right, but my guess is that we would at least come back and get a second opportunity into this zone. But as you do see some of that initiative move out of there, this offered you a nice 5-point move. Not that I mean, that's a great move. But you do see that price begins to come back in and we test this 16 level again. And so as I'm looking at this 16 level again, we see some orange towers, but again, I'm seeing weak selling here. I do not see the selling that's telling me, okay, they're making their final push, and I definitely don't see the buying. And as we kind of see here, okay, now we're starting to see that move that we were looking for. So here at 10:35, we've waited just a few minutes. If you were quick, sure, you got your scalp from 16, maybe you took it out at 25, you might have gotten core off, you got stopped on your runners, and now you're kind of questioning, okay, should I be getting in, should I not? And this is why I like to wait. And so you see this beautiful orange towers in, 1, 2, 3. You've got 32%, 64%, 50%, and then even better, now if you're looking to be a buyer, fading as it comes out of that zone. The only problem with this pattern is the initiative is there from the sellers into this zone, but I haven't quite yet seen the buyers show up. This is not going to tell me that I'm interested, but I will start watching the pattern. So you see this come in. I've mentioned this before. I look for the POC of this. So that would be the real key initiative move. Let's call it this 50% move. I'd be looking for a move away and a retrace of this 4113 level, and then blue towers to take me out. Well, before we even get a chance to see that, sellers are able to just kind of creep this back down. And you see, even though it's not an orange tower, this nice like 40% move down and in. And then we see the buyers do something that we've talked about again on Sunday study, and that's they begin to just absorb all of the selling. And if you go back and you looked at your time in sales, you went back and you looked at your DOM, I guarantee you would see some clues if you watched from 1037 to 1040 of seeing absorption on the tape, absorption coming in on the time in sales, and you would probably start to see somewhere in here some above ask type buying. And so we see this beautiful selling aggression in, and then we see exhaustion by the sellers, and it's almost like they're getting trapped here, right? So you see this move in, and then they start to get trapped, and you see this balance, and balance leads to imbalance, and now you see this initiative move from the buyers out, and it's blue tower, blue tower, blue tower, blue tower, blue tower, blue tower, and you start to see some of the buy imbalances. So even if you missed this move down to the 4110, which I think was a tough buy to just say, hey, I'm going to buy the complete edge of this. If it falls off this cliff, it's going all the way down at least to 4100, and then who knows, 4086 or whatever. But again, we had this nice little POC area that we were talking about from this initiative move down. So now I'm targeting kind of this area here and this POC. And so I'm looking for a buy opportunity somewhere between, let's say, 41.13 3/4 and 41.12.25. And so when price just kind of creeps down here and you start to see this absorption from the buyers, one last little attempt to push below just gets met right away by buy imbalances and two blue towers. You go 28%, 38%, 24%, 34%, 30%. And you see obviously these beautiful imbalances. I'm looking to be a buyer in here. I'm going to risk off of this previous POC and the breakout of that. So call it a 41.13 entry, which I think is pretty close to what I ended up getting on this day. And I'm risking 3 points and a very clear be wrong area. And as you can see, you get this beautiful initiation from the buyers, a little bit of balance here, and then again, another beautiful initiation by the buyers, 41%, 25%, and then just kind of continues to kind of go. And just like we said, if you miss the move, there's always another opportunity. So we talked about these POCs. So you've got POCs from basically 41.16 down to 41.15. And what happens? We come back and we test. And where do we test? 41.16. Sellers try to push this 50% move. It's met by initiative buying. And this is what I would call even like sort of a micro mid-move exhaustion by the sellers. This was their last attempt, and once this did not work and they were met by resistance at this 41.16 level, which was a level we called out pre-market and we were watching for, that's a break, retest, and then now let's go. And so sure enough, you can see that they make a nice little move out of that area, and we get an additional like 15 points out of that level. So that was a cool little version of kind of the orange towers in, blue towers out. This is just one version of a pattern that I particularly look for, but for me, it's always going to be that that initiation in on at least 30% for A plus, and then if I'm taking price risk, I'm going to get in on basically my first confirming blue tower, which would have been probably somewhere like right here. And so when I saw that print, I would have waited to get in at the retest of this POC. I would have got it at 41.13, which was my entry on that day, and I would have risked ideally no more than 4 points, and in this case the risk would have been just below the low of the day, which would have been 49.75, and I never had to worry about that as I just scaled out and actually held this trade for a little bit longer. I catch up on Sunday study chat if there's anything. Timmy trades at 420, cool idea, cumulative delta. Awesome. All right, so I think that's probably good for that example. You know, I've put a bunch of pictures in here, guys. Again, this is a 1250 constant volume or volumetric, depending on what platform you're using. So each one of these bars has 1250, and it is compressed by 3 ticks. On on higher volume days, I will look at these just as single, and you can see how like this massive orange tower, blue tower doesn't get any better than a setup like that. You can risk off those lows there, just this beautiful setup here, and have very tight risk on a whole multitude of different setups. So this is just kind of a pattern recognition. Macro Tactical talks about see it, hit it. This is my as clean a version as see it, hit it as I get. And I will literally take this just off of that pattern recognition. When I kind of sense this happening on a screen that I keep up in the corner, which you can kind of see how I'm looking at this for the most part. We're a little zoomed in here on a replay, but you can see kind of how I'm looking at this, and it's definitely always in view of what everything else that I'm looking at. So. All right, let's see here. We've got, if that is Sierra, is there a downloadable chart? So it's not Sierra, it's Motive Wave. Looks like, yeah, Sands posted us, I think, the Sierra version of this trigger chart. And I bet you we can make sure that that happens one way or another. We'll get that chart up and developed if it's not already in the Sierra chart. All right, so that was that. We talked about opening drive ranges as well, trigger charts. We did our weekly recap. I will just kind of quickly look at what I have for this week here. So let me go here. And I did have this set up as Job was kind of going through his. So let me quickly just hide this, and I'll just do a quick high level of what I am looking at for this week. So we've got those two, and now this. Let's see. Yeah, 156. There we go. Is that the right one? 1 second here. There we go. All right, and we will hide last week's, which is this one. All right, so levels for this week, as we look at these, the breadth is obviously shrunk. It's moved by just 1 point. And I am looking to, again, go with the one time framing, so the same trade setup that we had last week. And that is going to be looking for a pullback to buy below the STP target 1 to the low side, which in this case is 41.32. And I am looking to long that for a move back into the pivot and hopefully a rotation through the pivot up to target 1, which is 41.80, and ideally to target 2, 41.96. I do have a couple of higher time frame rebid and reoffer zones that I've highlighted here, and I do look for the confluence there. So this 41.32 entry, I'm looking for a rebid just below it at 41.30 to 41.27. And then I will kind of watch this take profit if I do get this trade initiated, because I will also look for an opportunity to reoffer the 41.76 to 41.79 area. So really cool confluence from the weekly delta pivot perspective, as well as the higher time frame rebid or reoffer. So both of these trades I will be looking to initiate here. I was talking with Leo right before the market opened, or as the market opened tonight, and we were really hoping that that gap to 41.71 would just kind of quickly pop up into this reoffer zone so that we could take it short. And I actually think Leo got a nice little scalp trade off of the open, trying to get buyers to push up into that zone. And I think you got a few points out of that, but it looks like they're pushing down lower right now. But this would be a trade, sort of like that edges trade that I would look to trade both ways. On the flip side, if we can break through, or if buyers are able to breach this reoffer zone, obviously high side targets come into play. Same thing for the low side. Let's see. Back to the opening range chart, 15 minutes. You're using 930. Yes, yeah. So Kaiser, that is, turn that off so you guys get the full view. This is a 15-minute opening range. 100% credit to Sand Effect for this. He put me onto these levels, and I started tracking them just every week. And so this is literally just the first 15 minutes of a session. So it's a 15-minute candle, and it is the open high low of that candle. And sort of the rules for that is that it should be a traditional open drive from a rules perspective. I will allow like this here, where you didn't get a close below on that second 15-minute candle. If you were to look at sort of the market profile rules of an open drive, I would say that this one would still fall in it. Although I would probably say that this open drive is weaker than, say, this open drive, which never got any lower than the first 15-minute candle. And sure enough, you know, this level has been tested multiple times, and now this one hasn't. Same thing on this one. This one was untested, and so when they're untested, I keep them yellow. If they've been breached, I will move them to red. So this level has now been breached and will be changed to red as far as my notes go. But this level has been tested, but has not had a close from a 30-minute perspective, or even like a daily perspective below. So I'll call this tested but not breached. How do we find the weekly delta pivots? It appears you were doing off volume profile for the previous week. So if you search in this channel, there is at least 2 examples of every single price that I use to calculate that. But quickly, the high level version is essentially it is the RTH delta pivot for the day. So the pivot that was generated during an RTH session for the time frames that I monitor. It's the high and the low of the week. So the highest delta RTH pivot, the lowest delta RTH pivot, and then the weekly close. That's used to calculate the pivot, and then the range is the high and the low divided by 2. That's used to calculate the range. If you want more detail on it, definitely just look in here. And there's kind of the complicated math piece. It's really not that complicated math, but just it's hard to explain. At the end of the day, this is a value area calculation done using the high and low delta and the weekly close, and that's it. Do you use P&F charts for finding reversals other than the technique? So I don't use a P&F chart at all. I'm pretty much using delta at price or delta cumulative by a lower time frame bar. I do look at a cum delta on like a 30-minute, but I really am looking for confluence between multiple instruments and not necessarily like bullish or bearish divergence. And even from a divergence perspective on higher time frame, I actually think it's more beneficial to look at when the divergence ends or when price starts to match the indicator versus like chasing the divergence down for potentially ever. Because we've all seen that, delta can be negative 15,000 in prices open driving to all-time highs. So that's kind of what I look at there. Roger's got the cover on the 1250 chart. Thanks, San. Let's see, Frank T. On island days, you're looking for ETH volume profile, RTH volume profile split on the same day. So on island days, I'm looking at RTH only. I tend to look at volume as well as value area, and really it's just kind of a nuanced thing. When we pop down into an area that's one of these island days, um, typically if we pop in from the upside, I'm looking at buyers to have to defend the like the absolute line in the sand for them would be that value area low for me. But if you go and you look at one of those days, so like if you went back and you looked at the island day from April 12th, and then you went and tried to find like what was the RTH pivot during April 12th, what was the Euro pivot, what was the JPY pivot that was happening there, and what I would do is kind of just plot those days. I would also maybe just kind of draw a volume profile on that day and say, okay, like what area is really looking important from an HVN perspective? Like look at this LVN right there. You've got kind of value area low from a volume perspective as well as value area low from TPO perspective right at 4110. And sure enough, that kind of ended up being that zone. But again, if you look at it, it was kind of like you see that taper, there was not very much interest on this day below that price. So to me, when I looked at this, I was saying, okay, like let's see if they defend this 4116. And if they don't, you've got this basically this HVN from 4116 down to 4110. And below 4110, it gets a little interesting. And so sure enough, they kind of defended that area. So there's probably a handful of different things that you could look at or just using your own tools and applying it to that philosophy of these island days. I'd be interested to see what you guys come up with. Let's see, board. Can you quickly go over weekly IB and weekly delta pivots? I kind of did the weekly delta pivots already. I'll look at weekly IB. So weekly IB, first 30 hours of the week. So last week's weekly IB was only 33 points. I've already transitioned this to the template I used for previous week's weekly IB, but this was what it looked like last week as we were tracking it. So a 33-point breadth of the weekly IB to me from a stats perspective means that we are going to extend most likely to about 100% of the range, but for sure I'm targeting like 50 to 75% minimum extension with a breadth of that size. You guys know I talk about the weekly IB mid all the time. The retest on the mid is like, I mean, it just happens so often. I don't have the stat to just kind of fire off the top of my head, but the weekly IB mid stat will be one of the first things that I look at when I get this programmed in Sierra. I guarantee you that. But so this was the weekly IB first 30 hours. So here was the open of the week. It was that gap down. This was the high on Sunday. Yeah, well, overnight. And then I think the low on Monday. And then by midnight, we had kind of crept up here, which was just below there. So that sets this range. And you can see we get below the mid and we balance at weekly IB low, and then we just start to liquidate down into the extensions. We pull back into weekly IB mid, balance on the mid, and then we liquidate through the mid, come right back into where we were. So this is just kind of a cool tool that I use from a higher time frame perspective. But I think where it really starts to be pretty cool and tricky is when we finish the week. What I'll do is I'll take the template here and I'll move it from the weekly IB to the previous weekly IB, and now I'm only tracking full 100% rotations. And all of the stuff that I do pretty much is all based upon rotational markets. So if the first 30 hours range, showed a 33-point breadth, I want to see 33-point extensions from there. And so everything is happening on 33, 33, 33. And I want to see how the market can rotate that 33. And so this week I'm going to look for confluence. And so as we start the week out, what I would do is kind of draw something like this, and then I'll get my weekly IB up here, and I'll start to, as the day develops, we have basically no action right now, but what I'll start to do is kind of get an idea of like where could these confluence zones be based upon some of the market generated information that I already have. So, I mean, let's just say to the low side, it's pretty clear that 4110, let's just say 4112 or something right in the middle, or 4114 is going to be a pretty clear area. Well, if we were to say come down to 4114 by Monday at midnight, what kind of confluence would that give me from a weekly IB perspective? And really, what does that mean to kind of break it down into what I look at is what is last week's players going to be thinking if we get to these prices this week? And what kind of reaction could I expect to get based upon the stats that I know about the weekly IB this week and the confluence that it has to the players that were interacting in the market last week? And so here, I mean, clearly you can see if we were to come down to 4110, that would create just a ton of confluence for some of these levels. And then I'm going to start to look at, again, as these develop, okay, so I'm watching 4110. Now from the extension side, look at this, 4175 and 4080. And then, maybe this 4042 and 4049. And so I start to look at potential scenarios on how, different levels of confluence could really start to play out between this. And again, this IB evolves from now until Monday at midnight. And then Monday at midnight, I think, is kind of that sweet spot for information, because if you go back and you look at this IB that developed and it was only 33%, or I'm sorry, 33 points as we opened Tuesday morning, which would have been, here, Tuesday morning, right here, Tuesday morning. I mean, this is all the information we have, and we have a breadth that's about this size, and we're going to see this thing develop, and we expect it to extend 100%, from the downside or the upside, and we're opening pretty much below or right at the low. So when we break that weekly IB low, man, that's a great trade to take and lean on those extension stats that you know. So that's kind of how I'm utilizing that. As far as weekly delta pivots, I mean, I shared that. I talked about it. Here's the weekly delta pivots for this week. My main two trade setups are either a full reversion to mean or rotation, similar to the SDPs. In a condensing week, I'm looking for a pullback to the low and a move to the high. In a expanding week, I'm looking for the opposite, and actually what I'll do is I'll trade Friday's delta pivot as an entry and look for a move all the way to the other side. I'll show that on a extended week. Otherwise, you can kind of go back and check it out in the notes, but they're in there. For sure. Guys, I mean, a couple of good questions coming in here. Appreciate you guys jumping in. I'll open it up or keep it open. We're at about an hour, but if anybody wants to share anything that they saw this week or their plan for this week, any more questions for myself, I think we still got Leo on, San, whoever. You guys feel free to jump in. Space, man, I was checking out your charts on Twitter. Some of your algo stuff looked really, really cool. We might have to touch base on that. I don't know if you put you on the spot here, but if you'd ever be interested in sharing some of your work there, whether it's just back testing in sim or if you're trading those. I'm very interested when I saw that. It was really cool stuff. Cool. All right, guys. Well, good luck if you're trading for the rest of the session here. It looks like not much has transpired as we kind of look at this chart here. Had a pull up into Thursday's delta and now kind of a unwind below. So an ability or a lack of initiation above that delta pivot, and would look for a push down potentially into this 4155, 4154 delta density area where you have multiple pivots. So I think big area for overnight. Not surprised that we're not seeing a ton of initiation, being that these levels are just so key. But I'm looking for some chop back and forth, kind of between this area and down into the 50s, and we'll look to initiate. I was hoping a little bit higher up here, into a pull up and look to offer down into these zones and see if sellers continue for a nice trade. Otherwise, we'll just kind of look and see what the market gives us overnight and make some new assumptions in the morning. All right, guys, take care.